Welcome.
Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And the Parsha for this week is Metzorah, which, of course, we don't translate, right? Just that constant problem. No translation for it. But we're into a subject that Harlan has actually mentioned. It's so interesting that this is the last little part we're going to deal with when it comes to Tzara'at, when it comes to this plague of Tzara'at. And that is the Tzara'at of houses. Houses. So we know that Tzara'at can affect the skin. That's where it started. It can affect the head. It can affect clothing and hides. And now we're dealing with the Tzara'at of houses. And I was really interested, if I didn't mention this yesterday, that I was reading Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, one of his articles on the Parsha, and he mentioned something I wasn't aware of, and that is that because this is a warning about essentially Lashon Hara, although I also think that it is a punishment for pride, because in the Haftarah for last week, we read about an individual who clearly showed pride and stubbornness, but mainly pride. The Naaman, the head, so the chief general of the army of Aram. At any rate, that's why it starts. This is the point Jonathan Sachs, Rabbi Sachs, was making, is that it is understood that it starts in the houses, that it starts in the home. And if one doesn't take care of it, then it's going to affect the clothing. And if you don't take care of it, then it finally affects your actual body itself. So I thought that was interesting that there's this process of it, which I was not aware of before. So we are going to look at the Tzara'at of homes. Here we go. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe ve'el Aharon lemor. And Hashem spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, now, I will tell you, this is not here in the Rashi, but in the Mechilta, because in in Exodus chapter 12, verse 1 or so, it talks also about speaking. Notice it said to Moses and to Aaron, that basically it says that when the Torah says that, we are not to take it literally. He did not speak to Aaron, but the reason for saying that he spoke to Aaron as well was to let us know that Aaron was just as deserving of divine communication as Moses, and that this is a way of showing honor to Aaron. But the truth is that it says elsewhere, of course, that Moses was unique in terms of the nature of that divine communication, that God spoke to him in direct speech, whereas to other prophets it would be in dreams, in that kind of way, or with metaphors, but not in direct speech. So there are places, however, where it says specifically that he spoke to Aaron, and the Mechilta tells us that maybe there are just a few times, maybe 3 times, where when it says to Aaron, it means to Aaron. And of course, that opens up the whole idea of not necessarily taking the Torah literally word for word. I mean, that's a huge, huge piece of information that the Mechilta is giving us. And when you think that the Mechilta was probably developed, oh gosh, first century, prior to the first century, in the early stages of the rabbinic period, although it does mention rabbis who I think are mentioned in the Mishnah, so it couldn't have been that late, that early, excuse me. I'm just trying to think this through as to the rabbis who are mentioned in the Mechilta and in the Torat Kohanim, which is this analysis, this halachic analysis of Leviticus. These are all works that precede, I believe, the actual Talmud, and that the Talmud itself is a confluence of these various sources and the synthesis of it. But this whole idea of biblical interpretation, which we know that how you interpret things, right? I don't think I've said this in a while. Okay, let's put it this way. Facts may be facts, but reality is interpretation. How you interpret those facts is your reality. So just a little extra thing there because it said to Moses and to Aaron. And I think another reason why it mentions Aaron here, and perhaps you've thought of this yourselves, is that because the priest is so intimately involved in the process of determining whether or not this is Tzara'at. So, going on. Ki tavohu el Eretz Canaan, when you arrive, when you come to the land of Canaan, asher ani noten lachem la'achuzah, which I am giving to you as an achuzah, as a possession. And this is sort of interesting, right? This is our relationship. This is speaking about our relationship to the land of Israel, to this land that has been in dispute for so many, many centuries. But the idea that we have an achuzah, le'echoz, is to grip, to hold on to, right? But again, to recognize that it is not a nationalistic kind of possession. We don't really own anything. Human beings, we're just not around long enough to own anything permanently. So we have it as a holding, and the idea that it is so intimately connected to the mitzvot, to the commandments that are associated with the land of Israel and with ourselves, and the establishment, of course, of the Beit HaMikdash, of the temple, that this sort of idea as being the foundation and, in a way, the title to the land of Israel for the Jewish people. I wonder to myself, if we really took that seriously and understood its implications, and the idea of compassion and consideration and kindness, which I believe ultimately, and of course justice, that underlines the Torah, whether or not it might be a roadmap to peace, who knows? But we have to do it. We have to take it from heaven and bring it down to earth. That's what we got to do. V'natati nega tzara'at, and I give a plague of Tzara'at, excuse me, bebeit eretz achuzatchem, and I give it in the house of the land of your possession. It's interesting, right, that it mentions this word achuzah twice, right? And again, I believe the emphasis of this is that were we to see these symptoms in a house outside the land of Israel, it doesn't count. It does not count. It has got to be connected to a home, to a house that is actually in the land of Israel. So, V'natati nega tzara'at. This is so lovely, as you'll see how Rashi interprets this. And again, another sort of very interesting point of view. So this is from Vayikra Rabbah. That's a different midrash. It's not the Sifra, but this is an Agadic midrash. This is a midrash that tends to be more theological and philosophical and literary and that kind of thing. It's not so much legalistic. And you'll see the nature of this commentary. Bisurahi, this was glad tidings. God was giving them a prediction, a tidings, lahem, to them. Shehanigaim ba'im alehem, that these afflictions, right, or affections, plagues were going to come upon them. Why? So this is different, right? This is not the position that I was quoting Rabbi Sachs on, right? You'll see. Lefi shehit minu Amoraim, that because the Amorites had hidden matmunayot, buried treasures, shel zahav bakirot batahem, in the walls of their homes, right? They heard that the Israelites were on the march to the land of Canaan. They were aware of it. And so what they did was they hid their treasures in the homes in the hopes, of course, that the Israelites would never find them. And if there was ever peace, or if they managed to defend themselves, the Israelites would not discover these treasures, right? Kol arba'im shana, for those 40 years, Shehayu Yisrael b'midbar, in the time when the Israelites were in the desert. Al Yedei HaNega, and by means of this nega, this particular affection, or right, notetz habayit, they would demolish the house, umotzan, and discover them. So here's a beautiful, beautiful example of a Vayikra Rabbah kind of commentary, right? The idea that sometimes the things that on the surface appear to be destructive or problematic or bad, right, that we see that way, sometimes they allow us to discover treasures. That in fact, sometimes there's a huge discovery. I mean, we've mentioned this, people have mentioned this so many times, and I've mentioned it just recently. Here we are on Zoom. If it weren't for COVID, we wouldn't be on Zoom. And it's opened up something so beautiful for us.
Isn't
Yes.
it taking somebody else's treasures?
It is, but these, the assumption, of course, I so appreciate you. There's a Lauren comment, right? Thank you. Yeah, it is. It is taking them. But what it's saying is it's leaving, for us to figure out that the way they did it. Remember, the reason this society, the Amorite society, was destroyed by the Israelites was because they were so corrupt, right? And we got a little example of it when we talked about Sodom and Gomorrah. So here's the justice, though, is it's a great warning to the Israelites, because here we are. The reason why we're in the United States and outside the land of Israel is because, and you read the prophetic material and you read the rest of the Bible and you read about how the Israelites started doing exactly the same thing that these Amorites were doing. They got treated the same way. So God is a just God. We may have a slight advantage only in the sense that we are descendants of the patriarchs, right? And I'm including the matriarchs when I say that. But that's about it. That's about it. And in some ways, Amos actually says we're even more responsible as a Jewish people because of this, because we have this incredibly intimate relationship with God, which places a greater responsibility on us to act righteously and kindly, etc. And this is a message, I think, that the Torah and so much of our material brings across. So yes, Lauren, absolutely, good point. And the same would happen to us. And in fact, of course, history says that it had. Yes, it did. So it's not like we can pat ourselves on the back and be jingoistic about it. There's no jingoism here. Yeah. So I'm so glad, because if you hadn't mentioned what you just did, it wouldn't have given me the opportunity to share this. So going on. So at least we're going to end this whole section, by the way, of Tzara'at with something that's a little bit lighter than the subjects we've been dealing with, right? So here we are. We're dealing with this situation. How do we deal with it? Uva asher lo habayit. And the person who owns the house, v'higid la kohen lemor, and he has to recount to the priest, saying, Kenega, it like a nega, like an affection, near Ali Babayit, it appears to me in the house. The house appears to me to have this problem, this affliction. And the point is that it says like this affliction, and we have a couple of real gems of Rashi today. Kenega nirali babayit. He doesn't say nega nirali babayit. A nega appears to me in the house. He says like a nega, right? And he's not being a valley girl. Okay, so kenega nirali habayit, and this is there is actually an entire Talmudic tractate called Negaim. It deals with the examination of the plague of leprosy and all the laws involved in that issue. So it says Perek Yud Bet. So this could be a Mishnah chapter, I believe this is chapter 12. And also Tzara'at Kohanim. Tzara'at Kohanim is the Sifra. So the Sifra mentions this comment as well. Afilu Talmid Chacham, even a brilliant scholar right? Even a brilliant scholar, Sheyodea, who knows? He studied these laws and he knows, Shehu Nega, he knows that it is, in fact, a Tzara'at. He knows it. Vadai, absolutely, conclusively. Lo Yifsok. He shouldn't determine it. He should not make that statement. He shouldn't say, make that decision. Davar barur lomar, as something quite clear, lomar, to say, nega nir ali, to say, I have seen an affection. Ella ken nega nir ali. And that's why the Torah says, he is not the one to make this determination. It has to be done by a Kohen. And if he's not a Kohen, even though he may be, let's say, even more knowledgeable than the Kohen in general, in Torah, he has not the right to say that. Words matter. Words matter. But Tzivaha Kohen, and the Kohen should command, Ufinu et habayit, and they need to clear out the house. They take out all the furniture, all the vessels, anything inside the house. They clear out the house. Beterem yavo hakohen, before the priest comes, leirot et hanega, to see and examine this nega, this affection. Velo yitma kol asher babayit, so that in none of the material, none of the things, none of the furniture, right? Nothing in the house should become unclean, right? Should not be unclean. And after this point, when they've cleared out the house, Yavo HaKohen, the priest should come, Le'rot et habayit, to come and examine the house. Here we go. Another little gem. We've got a whole bunch of really gems today. V'terem yavo hakohen, before the priest comes, etc. Shekol zman she'en kohen nizkar bo, because as long as the priest isn't directly engaged with the house, right, has not made that determination, ein sham Torat tuma, we cannot be speaking about the condition of impurity, right? The priest is the one who has to make that determination. So as long as the priest hasn't come and declared it impure, we cannot assume that it is. So this really, again, thinking about this, right, means that it's not a physical thing. It may be related to physical symptoms, but the actual way in which we relate to it as a symptom is as a spiritual issue. And I think in this way, the Torah is telling us that there's a tremendous connection. I mean, this is not necessarily, something we don't realize, but, how we emotionally respond, right, or how we intellectually respond to physical conditions, right, to situations, is a reality. It's a reality. And the reality of purity and impurity has so much to do with our emotional and intellectual place, and it's related to the physical world as well. And of course, we make this distinction between the physical and the non-physical, and we put a heavy distinction between the two sometimes, or people who say, well, the only reality that's worth dealing with is physical reality. Yes, Alex.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about get your house in order. So the reassembly of your house at that point is important, and it maybe you put it back together differently when you are clean.
Yeah, maybe you'd put your furniture in a different place. I don't know. I would definitely consult with my wife over that one. I'll let her make that determination. Okay? So we are not finished with this. V'lo yitma kol asher babayit, and so that nothing in the house is rendered unclean. Yes, David.
So just out of curiosity, listening in this section, it kind of reminds me of mold, right?
Yes, it does. Totally. Totally. Yes. Yes.
And then I keep wondering, okay, is mold is a physical manifestation, but does mold really mean if you get mold that you have an impure house spirit? Anyway, that's kind of the lines of think. I don't know. So
Okay. Let me deal with that. Okay. So first of all, we need to understand, right? It's been made very clear in the verses and reading these verses very carefully that this does not apply to homes outside the land of Israel. Okay? Not an issue. Couple of thoughts. One is to take what you're saying and say, look, I think any opportunity we have to look into ourselves and to say, is there any way in which I'm conducting my life, my attitudes, my character, etc., that needs examination? And I think, truthfully, the ability to introspect is such an important quality. And people who have never developed that ability are at a tremendous disadvantage. Excuse me, one moment. Sorry, I just had to cough. The ability to introspect is so important. And in fact, I will quote a non-Hebrew source. I think it's Socrates, who said, the unexamined life isn't worth living. Right? I mean, we're getting deep here, and we're really getting into what makes life worth living. And certainly one of those things, I believe, is a sense of significance, that there's great significance, that every individual is significant, and then discovering what it is. How does one develop significance? That there are ways to do that. And introspection is a vital tool in that ability. If you aren't able to introspect, so even though I wouldn't count mold as being, an impure pure issue, nevertheless, using these opportunities to look more deeply and to transform oneself and to develop, I think, is a gift. So I hope that answers the question.
yeah, it does. Yes, thank you.
Okay, you bet. Oh, incidentally, I do have to add one other point. There is a rabbinic position that basically says the moment a Jew steps out of the land of Israel, they essentially become tameh. They essentially become impure. So there is something about actually living in the land of Israel that has a deep effect on the person, on the individuals. So I mean, I think it's more of a literary statement than a legal statement, that there's this connection, which I hope we're sort of slowly bringing out as we study the Torah and understand the relationship that the Torah wants to give us in terms of why we came out of Egypt and why we were taken to the land of Israel. That, and again, of course, it's connected to the fact that people realize the location, that when you think of the Eastern Hemisphere, you look at the location of Israel and how it is the nexus between Asia, Africa, and Europe, and that Jerusalem, in that sense, is the navel of the world. And for that reason, the temple was located in Jerusalem, in a sense of representing a place where the divine light could enter into the world. So there's so much, beautiful symbolism involved in that. At any rate, going on, this is also a lovely Rashi today. We are very privileged today to read some of this stuff. Okay, so let's go on with this. Let me find the place, right? Okay, so here we go. And we're right here. She'im lo yifnehu, because if he does not clear it out, if he doesn't take all the stuff out of the house, v'yavo hakohen, and the kohen arise, v'yireh hanega, and he sees the affection, niskak lehisager, it now becomes obligated to lock up the house, v'chol ma shebetocho yitma, and everything in the house, because if in fact it's determined that the house is impure, everything in the house now becomes impure as well. The alma chasa Torah. Now let's Rashi's in a way saying, well, let's look at this a little more carefully. What exactly is the Torah concerned about here? Im al kli shetef, well, if it's concerned about washable items, yitbalem v'yitaru. He can always go and take them to the mikveh and purify them. It's not a problem. There's a correction there. V'im al ochlim, and if it's about food, if it's about concern that the food is going to become impure, there's an answer there. Umashkin, or liquids, fluids, right? Yochlem bimei tumato. When he's in a state of impurity himself, he can consume them, right? So, I mean, we're not talking here about priestly stuff, truma. We're talking about a regular human, regular non-priest, and it can be even a priest who might be in a state of tuma, because we actually are in, at times, states of tuma, and we can eat tuma food. He can do it. So, no loss. So what's the Torah concerned about? Alo chasa Torah ela al kli cheres. The Torah is simply concerned about pottery. Kli cheres means pottery. She'ein lahem tara b'mikvah, because there is no, once a vessel of pottery becomes impure, that's the end of it. You have to break it. And so, of course, what Rashi is bringing out here is the degree to which the Torah, i.e., God, is concerned even over the smallest loss that a person might have to experience. Fabulous, fabulous, Rashi. And with this, we'll end today's lesson. So this one was a winner. Okay, let's take this and mark this space. And of course, you are welcome to comment before I actually stop the recording.